a whiteboard because we don't have not something we can share with the Surface Hub. So it's just you're just gonna get a full screen video, which is also okay. So let's kick it off.
Yep.
Hey guys,
all right.
Welcome to the 30th installment of the community Q&A. We've got the usual suspects in the room, but probably let's just go around and say hello and introduce ourselves real quick. Vaz, if you want to.
Hi, I'm Voss. I've been here before.
Hi, I'm Alexander.
Hi, I'm Srav. I work on monitoring and diagnostics for Service Fabric.
Hi, I'm Peter.
Steve, you guys know me.
I'm Matt.
He's new.
He's new.
Yeah, I'm new. I'm
Yeah.
new here. It's my first day.
Don't ask him too many hard questions.
Yeah, I don't know anything.
Yeah. Anyway.
I'll just say, and I'm Mark, and I'm remote, so you won't see me today.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Hello, guys.
What's up, Mark?
Hey, what's up?
It's not the same without you here.
Yeah.
You'll do fine.
Also, this room is
Yeah, I kind of prefer the round table. I think we should switch back to.
Anyway,
But the team is growing. Maybe we need to adapt, get bigger space.
questions and answers.
You should. By the way, you guys should dial into the Skype meeting because we don't have a Surface Hub today. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the Skype meeting. It looks like you're on a Teams meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
It's apparently the same thing.
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
Skip.
We're trying to figure out. But we're expecting, questions to be in the Skype meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
That's where we are. That's fine.
Presume.
Yeah, let's use Skype. The link was Skype, so I'm real curious that you can join it.
Oh yeah, it is
Teams.
working. Okay, so I'm getting that. We're seeing the notifications at the top. All right.
Cool. Can you crack that open? See that there?
Can we actually?
Oh, it's going through that. I see.
So, question we have in chat today from Clint is, any progress on fixing the issue where having containers enabled, some computers get an access denied problem where creating a cluster hangs up, rather than lock up and fails?
This is on cluster setup. So that there's a GitHub issue, I believe. This shows you how much I know about it. It's number 1056. Yeah. Bingo. Yeah. So there's the interesting thing about that one. There's a few workarounds. One is turning off the container features. The other one is looking at the local cert store and making sure that the access permissions on it are set correctly for the everyone user. That also seems to fix it. As to how or what is causing certain machines to experience this and others are not, our best guess at this point is that there's different group policies for different people, and some of them are restricting the permissions, or that something else is setting the permissions on the local cert store in a more restrictive fashion, and that's causing these issues. We don't know what's different between these different environments. Clint says personal. Okay, so the one workaround then is to check, I think further down past the hey, just disable the container feature, there's a separate instruction about trying to ACL the cert store differently and then seeing if that helps the local setup. If that also doesn't work, you can, I would say, email me. I will put my email in the window. Email me and I'll get you involved with the folks who are looking at this one to try and figure out what other workarounds might be available or what is causing that ACL to also not take effect. I have not seen a case yet where the ACLing was not the issue, where if we fix the ACLs that things work correctly. But again, it's still a bit of a mystery as to why this is affecting. Yours is now a personal machine, so I guess my GPC idea is null and void. So we have to look at that and see what's going on. Check the ACL workaround, and if not, let me know, and we can go from there.
All right, so the next question we have in chat is there any documentation, best practices around inner loop for microservices development using Service Fabric, like the Azure Dev Space with AKS? Any insights on how Microsoft teams develop the services like Cosmos or other services would be helpful to on this context, the inner loop?
So I don't think DevSpace is being actively developed for Service Fabric right now. So the best way to do inner loop development depends on maybe the type of application you're developing.
Yeah, because regular microservices aren't too bad.
Yeah.
But when you get the containers, that's when the local loop starts to be a little rougher.
A little more difficult. There are features in Visual Studio like refresh mode if you're doing web applications, which makes it a little easier just to develop it's basically single services though, one-off. But if you have multiple applications, yeah, it's as much as you can deploy locally, probably the better, or as much as you can shim out. But other than that, unfortunately, we don't have anything quite like dev spaces yet.
Yeah, I mean, the only feedback I would also add to that is that obviously the Visual Studio's experience in tooling for packaging apps and developing apps is I guess the best local development experience that we can provide, or that we are providing today with integration into the IDE. Other than that, though, we don't have a prescriptive way of developing because we don't have a prescriptive language or prescriptive OS, right? That's why you can write in any container or any language you want. So I think we should probably put that on the roadmap, though, right? At least go talk about cutting a feature after that.
We are talking with it's actually the Visual Studio team, basically, is who is running the dev spaces thing.
Yep.
And we are working with them to get one built, but it hasn't happened yet. So that is something we do want to build, and we do know that we want that experience. I think also if you could let us know like what part of that loop is currently busted for you, that might be what part is hard, right? We might be able to say, oh, if you set up the environment like this, or as Vas was mentioned, like flip on the single node clusters or dev application refresh mode, things like that might help unblock you in the meantime. But yeah, we like dev spaces too. I think it's just not there yet.
The big problem with dev spaces is it only works on Linux, so you wouldn't really have.
That's one of the main things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe if it was Service Fabric on Linux and you were developing from a Ubuntu box.
Well, I mean, if you're deploying to a Linux cluster.
Right.
But the actual, like the work they do to route requests and everything, that all depends on Linux IP tables, and there's no real Windows equivalent for that. So
yeah,
I don't know how far along they are in making that work on a Kubernetes
Windows
clusters on Windows. That's probably still quite a ways away because those features just don't exist. We are actually working with the Windows team to get something like that implemented. Not just for something like dev spaces, but for our own purposes as well. But it's a ways out there currently.
All right. The next question from Demir is, any news regarding actor model roadmap?
Not really. We've been working with the Orleans team quite a bit, though, to bring some of the new Orleans, their 2.0 version of Orleans, into our new resource model and into the mesh environment. But other than that, nothing really.
They've had support for running Orleans on top of Service Fabric clusters for a while. I think that this will help firm that up a little bit.
Yeah.
So the next question we have is, can we run both Linux and Windows containers in the same Service Fabric cluster? If not today, any timeline for this support? So I'll let you guys take that.
I don't know if there's a timeline for it, but you will be able to at some point. So one of the things that we're working on and coordinating again with the Windows team is running Linux containers on Windows. So that's not quite there yet, but I don't have an exact timeline on it. But at some point, you should be able to do both Linux containers and Windows containers on a Windows-based cluster, so using a Windows host.
Yep.
You can run mixed workloads with mesh, right?
Well, not yet.
You can deploy two different apps.
I guess you can. You can deploy two different applications, but that's just because of the way mesh works right now.
Right.
But if you own your own cluster and they're all, say, Windows machines, and you want to run both Linux and Windows containers on there, that will be possible at some point once we have Linux containers stabilized and working on Windows hosts, which is coming at some point. Probably first half of next year, but no promises there yet.
All right, so on to the next question. Marcin, I think I will have a question to the new guy.
Oh.
He means you.
Uh-oh.
What is the current situation with upgrades?
1 second, Peter was like.
What is the current situation with the upgrade domains in the multi-regional clusters? Clusters seem to read upgrade domains from BMSS, and if you have, for example, 7 regions with 2 nodes in each region, you end up having 7 top-level FDs and only 2 UDs. Question, is there something like upgrade domain override, like the mechanism to deal with it? What can I do about this?
So there are overrides that you can use today. I know that it exists for FDs. I think it was going to be added for UDs. I don't know if it's there in the template yet. So you can at least get better FDs. Your upgrades are still going to be too chunky. But that is something that we are also adding. The real answer is that you pointed out correctly, we do get the information for the topology from the VMs, and the VMs are kind of lying because they're saying that, you know, the VM in region 1 is the same as the VM in region 2. That's something that we're working with Azure infrastructure to get exposed correctly within the VM in some place that we can read it. And then when we're coming up, we will know that, you know, this is in UD0 and this is in UD0, but they're actually in entirely different Azure availability zones or regions or VM scale sets or something like that. So we can use that to separate apart all the different fault domains and upgrade domains and get the real topology of the cluster. As it is, you could do this with Service Fabric standalone, actually would work just fine because you're in control, full control of describing the topology. But with a cluster that you're standing up via the Service Fabric resource provider in Azure, it's trying to do this in an automated fashion, and it's just not working with the right information. So we're fixing that. I don't have a timeline exactly on when it would light up, but I know that, for example, we're targeting multiple availability zones first, so that at least within the regions that have multiple availability zones, you'd be very easily able to span a cluster across those. That gets you a pretty good level of reliability. And then we're going to go to the multiple region support. It's basically the same work that we need to do under the hood, so I wouldn't expect that those are going to be terribly far apart. But that is something that we're still working on. Yeah.
All right. So the next question I have from David is, can we get some additional information about how under the hood cluster deployment works? So that's a really great question. I guess
Peter, you want to take that one?
We'll let Alex take it.
First class.
First
Filling
cut,
up.
huh? Okay. I'm assuming you mean like we could talk about, I guess, a particular scenario such as like a certificate being changed for your cluster. So is that going to help? David, can you?
I think it means the first deployment more than anything else.
Like provisioning of the cluster? Or are you talking about after the fact I go and change something?
Maybe just talk about when you create a cluster for the first time.
Yeah, I think that's what it
when
is.
you upgrade a cluster.
Sure, provisioning. Oh, okay, cool. So I guess I give a cut at this. The initial, so we can make our own tools.
So then that's interesting. Are you attempting to do this on Azure or off of Azure? This is more similar to that, like bootstrapping your own cluster.
Let's have David unmute. David,
Anywhere.
if you can unmute and talk to us, that'd be good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway.
Yeah, David, if
He
you
can't.
oh, you
Okay.
Okay.
It
So
won't
yeah,
work.
this is like they're trying to set up like a
His own effectively
his
standalone.
own standalone kind of automation for bootstrapping, you know, the SF runtime to machines as you scale up and scale down, like if you're using like VMware or some other type of virtualization stack and running it somewhere else.
Right. There's a few things I can jump in a little bit here because we get this question a fair amount on that.
And I could talk to how our stuff works,
Do it.
if you'd like.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful for people.
Hey, David, I think I just force unmuted you. Can you try it?
Yeah, you did. Okay, thanks, man.
So, you know, to give a general background, obviously the first and foremost thing that you need is some means of distributing your runtime libraries, right? Your cab files and the configuration, right? Bootstrapping it or tying it down to the machine, as well as seeding it with the appropriate secrets, such as a certificate for strapping or for bootstrapping your cluster for startup. You know, these can be solved in many ways, right? You can have some type of agent or extension in case of VMSS that does these things, such as, you know, reaching out and downloading the runtime library from some place. Obviously, in this case, you know, we provide a distribution model in Azure that allows an automated deployment and distribution as well as upgrades. If you were to do this yourself, you'd have to have some mechanism for getting these files on an automated basis, maybe polling or looking for updates as we distribute them and downloading them somewhere. And of course, bootstrapping or distributing them to your individual instances and starting them up. Second to that, I think the problem that you're going to run into most frequently is that how do you get a secret, right? How do you get specifically some type of identity onto these automated process where it can reach out and grab certs or other secrets and install them. That is something that's not a trivial task to do it in a secure way. So I would imagine you might run into some challenges that when trying to build your own custom bootstrapping solution.
Right.
But that would be the next thing you'd probably want to work on.
The issue is, even if I wanted to work on that, there's no clue how, because, for example, the Windows deployer that you have, the PowerShell modules and assembly, so you can't even get an idea of how it works. In other words, there's no way to know how you get the config to each node. In other words, what form, where you put it, after you've converted it from the JSON to the XML, where does it go? Then, I see there's this Magic Service Fabric installer that gets launched with some switches have no idea what any of those are.
Right. So first off, thanks for raising this. We've gotten it a handful of times in the last couple of months actually, mostly because people are trying to explore ways on either bootstrapping it themselves because of requirements in their infrastructure from a compliance perspective, or people that have been looking to replicate the installer service and run it on Linux instead. Do you mind if I ask you if you're doing this on Windows or Linux, or what your intended case is?
I'd like to be able to do it on both. So if there was a walkthrough for both of how to do it manually, if you want to just do it by hand, the painstaking, no matter how painful it was, but it would give you the knowledge you need, because you guys are working on that Bosch solution for Linux. However, Bosch does not target Hyper-V or any Microsoft solution. It only targets VMware OpenStack or other clouds. So with a Microsoft solution, it still does you no good.
So first up, yes, we can get you that. If you need it right away, I'm going to drop my email in the Skype, and we can correspond sooner rather than later. Just so you know, though, the longer-term plan is still to get that content out. So we're trying to figure out if the right place is, putting all these steps into the GitHub repo where we have the open source stuff, the full source code, or if we want to turn it into a document that's published that says, here's how you manually bootstrap and provision a cluster. So one way or another, in the next couple of weeks, you will see this live. But if you'd like something sooner, I'm dropping my email in chat. We just had the same thread with a different person, happened about a week ago. So I'm very happy to just forward on the same stuff to you and put you in touch with the right folks.
In fact, I emailed you. Mark Fussell told me to email you with that question last month, and never heard anything back.
Okay, let me check. Sorry, where would that email have come from? What's your if you don't mind?
grk@drkngs.net. And Matt, I know I had asked you about this over 2 years ago, and you told me, oh, it's coming in a month.
Yeah, probably was then.
He just didn't specify which month.
Yeah. It is in a month. It will land in a month somewhere.
No, I believe he said next month, but anyway.
Yeah, you got you there, man.
Oh man, dead to rights.
Okay, so your email is the one that actually kicked off we had an internal discussion, which is where we're at right now, trying to figure out what the right place is to post this stuff. So your email prompted that off, so that's good, and you will see results from that. But I can get back to you, right away with the steps manually if that would help.
If you would, that would be great, because I've got to see if it's feasible for about 3 different things, and that's the only way it becomes feasible, and it's sort of been a 2-year hold-up.
Okay.
We can probably figure
All right, yeah, we can definitely figure this out.
Okay, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Sweet. So then the next question we have is, any news on a tool for backup restore? I know I can use the APIs, but I thought there was mention at Build about a formal tool. I believe this is talking about the backup viewer.
Might be the backup and restore service.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is backup, and I think it was what you talked about at Ignite last year.
I didn't.
It's probably the service that he's talking
Probably
about.
the service.
I guess, yeah. So less of a tool that you run yourself, but a service that would go and do it for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's really 2 things that this could be. So one is, today, in order to take a backup, you have to write specific code inside your service, and then it creates a backed up folder, and then you have to take the backed up folder and stash it somewhere like blob storage. and then if you wanted to do a restore, you have to go call this scary API that's called like on data loss or something like that, and that's spooky. And that's when you get to actually restore the data into the service. So it's very manual. And there was a web reference application that contained an example, for example, of how to do that. But it was a lot of code and pretty manual. I think we just launched the backup and restore service, which should be either already in 6.3 or it came out in 6.4, which is rolling out soon. Soonish?
Soonish.
Okay. Sorry. It's rolling out in a month.
In a month.
It's rolling out in a month.
Yeah.
See, Dave, I learned. You don't want to teach me these tricks.
Slowly, but
Slowly. So it's rolling out in a month. But the whole point of the backup and restore service is that instead of having to write this code yourself, instead of having manually take the backups and put them in Blob or somewhere else, the backup and restore service is built into the cluster, and you can turn it on and then send it something like, hey, back up this service every week, take the backup and put it in this location in blob storage or on a file share. And that gets rid of all that backup code and also gives you a schedule, which is pretty nice. So you can just say, back this up every day or every hour or something like that. And then the next part is that also triggering that restore is handled for you under the hood. So you don't have to deal with that manual invoking data loss API or any of that other stuff. You just say to the backup and restore service, hey, take this most recent backup or take this backup number 5 and restore that into this service. And that makes life a lot easier. The other thing you might be talking about is a viewer. So when the data is in this backup, you want to be able to crack it open and look at it to make sure that it's got the right information in it. That viewer is still in preview. I know we've released a few different piecemeal parts of it over the months. It's not ready yet. The first thing that we're going to get is a viewer, so you can look at the data. And then the second thing we're going to do is an editor, so that if you wanted to fix the data or undo a partially completed transaction or something else that was in the backup that you didn't want to be in the restored data, that would be something you could do, and then you could restore that edited backup into an actual service. So those are the two things. The viewer is further out. The service should be shipping like currently. And that'll make your life a little bit easier.
Cool. So there's a question about the runtime policy.
The next question is from Lewis. What is the current support policy for SF runtime versions for Azure clusters? It seems runtime versions go out of support quite quickly. This is a great question for Deep.
So the current support policy, I think, Vaz, you just dropped the link. Yeah, so that is the current model where effectively when the next version comes out, you have about 60 days to move. And that's sort of the model that will continue to exist for the time being. At the same time, we are working on a concurrent release stream for a more stable, longer supported version of Service Fabric because of people like you that have asked for a version that lives for longer because of various deployment scenarios or reasons for which they wouldn't want to update their cluster as often. So we're still working on the right model for that, but you can expect to see some updates from us in the next couple of months on that front. If you have a specific scenario that you have in mind, I would really appreciate if you could reach out to me and tell me what it is, because that'll help me make the case and structure this better for all the people that actually need this. So I will now leave my email since it wasn't required before, but you said, Lewis, if you could, please send me an email and describe to me why you'd like the runtime version to be supported for longer than the 3 or so months it is right now, because we're exploring options in the time frame of 3 to 5 years. So it'd be nice to have another data point.
Wonderful. The next question is coming from Marcin again. Can you configure TLS on top of SFM Gateway resource, front end, back end? What kind of certificates would SFM Gateway resource will accept from backends?
So not yet. We're building out this secret store service, and that's the mechanism by which you'll be able to deliver certificates into the gateway to then configure TLS. So we don't have that quite out there yet, but at some point.
Okay. On to the next question. Do you have a roadmap available for Mesh? This is from Clint.
All sorts of things.
Well, I don't know if we have one published.
No. Yeah, we have one.
That'd be the. If we did, it would all say everything is arriving in a month. Call back.
Well, as you know, we're currently in public preview. We're planning going into GA next year sometime, probably somewhere midway through the year at the very earliest. But we are also thinking of supporting people that want to go into production before that. So if for any reason, you're asking this question in terms of trying to figure out if you can go to prod on Mesh earlier, then we're basically working on a go live program for people that need an early license.
That is something you can do. I think if you're looking for all these different features, we don't have a public one available for anyone, right? So as you're waiting on stuff like the network resource or the Envoy integration to come available, things like that throughout Mesh, multi-tenancy to be supported, stuff like that, we don't have a public one. That's something I definitely have an ask, I imagine, in the product group to go get that done, but we don't have anything public to share.
Do you have any specific features or asks that you're looking for,
I
though?
didn't specifically ask any specific features you had in mind. You're just looking for a roadmap in general?
Yeah, general.
So I'd say that we'll work on getting an actual published roadmap with updated features and things like that. That's something we probably should have public.
Sure.
Other than that, if you're looking for more of hey, when's this going to go GA? My GA date is X. Your GA date seems to be X plus some number. What do we do? I need to ship. If you're in that sort of situation, this goes for anybody on the call. If you're in that sort of situation, I would say just reach out to probably Deep.
And he's already there. So
yes,
he's already there. Send mail to Deep, and we can figure out, if there's some sort of go live license or plan that we need to engage with you on. We've done this before, so we did this when Service Fabric, the core product, was GAing originally. We had a bunch of preview opportunities where people were kicking the tires early. And then if your GA date was close and if the feature set looked good, in terms of it wasn't what you needed was not wildly divergent from what was going to ship on day one, then we figured out how to ship you early and get you support first class before the official GA date. So as we get closer, that's something that we can continue to consider, and it's something we're already talking with various partners about. So don't be afraid. If you really need it, just ask.
Yeah,
and we can work on it.
Sweet. Next, from Andrew.
Hey, Andrew.
Have been having quite a few challenges getting traffic to work with my on-prem cluster. Continue getting 403 stating client certificate required, even though I'm including the same key insert files that I use in Postman to access the API successfully. On the Traffic Service Fabric repo, have not been able to get anywhere in terms of why it's happening. They are at a loss. Any pointers for how I can troubleshoot this further and see why clusters keep responding with 403? Do you have any customers that you know that are working, that know of this working not in Azure?
I know there's a bunch because Trafic is mainly used on-prem. As far as help other than who's in the repo, I don't know if Joni's been replying or maybe Lawrence. Those are the two guys who did the
Johnny and Lawrence are the guys to talk to, but if they're not sure how to fix this.
Yeah, I mean, then it's a Trafic kind of general problem, probably.
Maybe.
So maybe find a generic Trafic forum and go from there. Another thing you might look at is if you can get it to repro, where you're watching the traffic from Trafic bounce between the actual Trafic proxy and your service, or Trafic and the cluster, and you're seeing it get rejected. I don't know, Fiddler or Wireshark it and see if you can see what the rejection actually is.
So if you use the same certificate, you can use that. You can use Postman and access the API successfully, but Trafic can't. So,
but the question is it failing? Is Trafic failing to look up the address?
Well,
is it failing to look up the address, or is it failing to route it to the actual service? Right?
If there are traffic
yeah.
logs,
So just to confirm, it is the same. It is the same certificate. Hey guys, it's the same cert. Fiddler, we tried to go down that route. I believe it was Lawrence that was helping me, but basically he said that's kind of going to be a challenge due to having to get the traffic to go through, the the proxy there, and he said he wasn't aware, like with Go, like how I would potentially do that. So that's kind of been the challenging point, is I can't actually see it from my machine. One of the debugging steps I already did was I actually tried to call our dev cluster, but from my box, so I can try to like get the, be able to intercept it, but nothing I've tried has been able to see that. So I know that if I put a typo in the cert name, I get a different error saying that, hey, you need to give me a cert. So I know it's accepting the cert into traffic, but for whatever reason, it's not forwarding it properly.
Okay, so it's loading up the cert. Do you have are there verbose logs for traffic you can look at to see when it's doing, when it's calling Service Fabric Resolve APIs?
I think I have them as verbose as possible, and unfortunately, it's not very specific. You just mainly get the 403, the Service Fabric error that comes back is what it mainly logs. I can try to see if there's a log level.
So it doesn't give you the request body or response body or anything?
I'll look into it further to see if I'm missing a log level, but I think I'm already logging at the most detailed level.
Noise or something.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I was trying to clarify was, from what you just said, it sounds like the problem that traffic is having is it's having problems talking to Service Fabric. Do you see it actually hitting your service and then your service is handing back a 403? Or is the 403 coming from traffic trying to resolve the service in Service Fabric?
So I guess how would I best determine if it's actually hitting my service? That would be a good troubleshooting step if I knew how to do that.
Well, you'd know if it was your service. I mean, you could just modify something in your service to tailor a specific response.
Right.
That could say, "Hi, this is coming from the service."
Yeah. Just inject a header in your 403 response or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or even if you're doing on-prem, you can just attach a debugger and see if it hits.
Yeah. See if you see a call show
I'm
up.
assuming that's probably not the case, though.
No, I think that's interesting then.
You'd only get a 403 there if your services had some authentication on them. So
Well, I think this is the 403 because the cluster's secure, right? So you have to communicate with the client certificate, right? That's even before my code gets hit, I would assume, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what I was just
exactly.
asking to make sure. Where's the 403 coming from?
Yeah. But your service code itself doesn't have any authentication mechanism that would return a 403?
No. And for example, I can replicate this easily by hitting the property management API in Postman without providing a certificate. I'll get the same exact response that traffic is getting in terms of the message, the 403 client certificate required.
So it just sounds like traffic is.
So with that client certificate, can you do? Does it have write access? Can you use that certificate to create and delete services? Or
I've tried with read and write. Traffic states they only require read, but just in case, I tried with a read-write certificate as well. So,
It just sounds like traffic is misconfigured in terms of talking to the cluster security.
Yeah, something about the way it's creating that HTTP request Service Fabric doesn't like, but I don't know what that would be without actually seeing it.
So from the cluster side, is there anything I can do, you think, to capture anything? I mean...
Do we capture those traces, the requests that we might? So that's kind of tough because it's hard to view those traces, but...
Some of them technically end up in the messaging, events that Kavya worked on about 6 to 8 months ago. That end up in the data messaging channel.
From Fabric Gateway? Because it's Fabric Gateway that'll be rejecting it.
Yeah, and I don't want to take up too much time here, but if there's any suggestions or if I can reach out to anybody to maybe just get some pointers, offline, let me know what you guys think.
Do you have an issue open on their repo for traffic?
On their repo, yeah, I do.
Can you send me a link to that? I can at least forward that to someone on my team that will tell us if the endpoint that traffic hits to try to get that information. If we log the request and the response that came in, because what we would need to look at is the actual request body that traffic is sending to us and see if there's just something wrong with it. Yeah. And then that would be something to go fix and
something we're not being permissive about that we probably should be, or something like that.
That's basically what we need to see is what that request body looks like. So, just send me that issue just as a reminder. Just put it in the chat window, and I can check to see if our HTTP API gateway logs that stuff or not.
It's been posted.
If it does, we can go look at it.
speeds.
Not, we'll have to come up with something else.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like going into traffic and adding some additional logging in there, wherever it's making that request.
Yeah.
See if you can up
And
the,
see
up
what
the verbosity
and see
there.
what
Yeah,
certificate it's using.
Yeah, exactly.
It really feels to me like it's misconfigured and it's not passing the right cert, but I don't know.
Yeah, because if it works in Azure, there's no reason it wouldn't work.
On-prem.
Yeah, I asked them how they were doing it for their tests and stuff like that, and they said they were obviously doing it in Azure with self-signed certs. So I can go in that direction and try to repro it that way, but that's not my scenario. So it's
Unless
like
It's weird though, because it's the exact same thing.
unless it's a cert access thing or something like that.
But he said it's not like traffic's not failing to get the cert.
right.
Well,
'Cause I actually have to, take the PFX file and create the key and, cert that they're requiring using OpenSSL. I did that. Postman requires those same two files, and I can confirm that if I include those same two files that I generate in Postman, everything works fine. If I include, if I misname the certificate file in the traffic config, traffic gives me a separate error, saying, hey, could not find valid certificate information or something like that.
So here's actually another thing you could do. So this is an on-prem cluster, right? So you have access to the machines that this is running on.
I don't, but yeah, someone does, yeah.
Well, I mean, so you could probably stand up, if you have access to the certificate, the PFX file, you might be able to stand up just like a one-node cluster locally that uses it, or maybe just a test cluster or something. But if you did that and then you run Wireshark on those machines, you'll get all the traffic that's going through. As long as that initial request from traffic isn't encrypted, you can at least see, like, you can follow the TCP stream and see what it's actually sending, because that's really what we're after, is the request body that it's sending. See if the certificate information is in there, and if it's correct. Like, you can compare it to what Postman sends and see if they match up.
Yeah, I think a one node repro where you have your client, traffic, your service, and a cluster all configured roughly the same way to mirror what you would do in your actual cluster, and see if it repros there. That might be the way, because then you're going to be able to capture everything.
Yeah, I would do that, and then run Wireshark, because then you can see everything that's
Can I do that locally, or would it have to be on a separate box?
You can do it locally. Yeah, your local OneNode cluster, you can set up. The little icon in the icon tray that comes with the tooling doesn't give you the option, but if you go into where the SDK is installed, just like program files, Microsoft SDK, Service Fabric, you'll have all the cluster setup PowerShell scripts and the cluster configuration files. I think there is an option there for just setting up a secure cluster within that script. So you can just run the script and say -secure. We just don't expose it through the UI, but you can just run that in PowerShell.
Okay, yeah, that's a good step too. I'll try that one this afternoon.
Yeah, and then if you use the same certificate, you can just play around with it just on your local one box, run Wireshark, see what's going across the wire. That'll help at least. And then maybe if you find something there, you can post that up to that. Keep it going on that one issue, and we can maybe swing by and take a look at that too. See if there's something.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. So this is back to Marcin. This is back to a gateway question for the new guy in the room. Can you use a gateway resource between two SFM networks? Will all the services in the front and side of gateway be able to discover host names registered in gateway to the gateway IP addresses?
Probably the other new guy.
Second newest.
So can you use it between service networks? Yeah, so the idea with the gateway is, so at least in the mesh environment, all of your applications run in an isolated overlay network. And in order to get a bridge to an external network, like an open network, or to another isolated network, the gateway is the thing that bridges those two. So one application in isolated network A wants to talk to an application in isolated network B, they would go through the gateway. And will all the services in the front end side of the gateway be able to discover host names registered in gateway to the gateway IP address? I'm not quite following what you mean by that. Will all the services in the front end side of the gateway registered?
I think the question is, if I'm in Mesh App 1 and I resolve a service, can I resolve a service in Mesh App 2?
Sure.
And if I do, does it correctly hand back the corresponding gateway's address? The answer should be yes.
Well, okay. If that's what you're asking, I mean, no, you wouldn't really do that. Like, you would say you would just send traffic through the gateway as if you were an external client, and then the gateway would route it for you. So you're not going to, like application A and network 1 isn't going to get the IP addresses of application 2 and network B because those IP addresses are internal to that network, so they're not going to make sense to you anyway, so you won't have to. So you talk through the gateway like an external client would.
All right. Next question, which sounds like it's for me.
MSI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is this MSI for VMSS. Is it possible to run a Service Fabric native application in a way it is isolated from the actual cluster's VNet, maybe in the future, or is it always going to be full trust? Wonderful question. So yes, today the VMSS MSI is an identity associated to the resource, not your VNet. So that is a security boundary, not the VNet, but the actual resource itself. We are actively working on building an SF application MSI, which would then bring that boundary to the individual application. But that is not something that's available today. So in the future, in terms of when you're looking at timelines, we're tentatively, first half of next year having something for public. We'll likely have some private previews in Q1, but I would definitely shoot for build for any type of public announcements, and here's how it works. Setting expectations.
You need to be more subtle. You need to say that there's a conference that we can't name. Okay.
Right. The same one that happens every single year, right? And if you have any questions around the way that works today, I have some samples already available that can use a VMSS MSI to authenticate to Azure resources and grab properties back. So
Okay.
So yeah, we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. What we have here?
Yeah, backup and restore is for all stateful services, including actor types.
Yep. Looks like we have one. What is the best way to integrate and test microservices independently in two different SF apps? E.g., dev, number one, create a service in his/her SF application, and dev 2, create another service in his or her application. How they can test the service integration with the one developed by dev 1 locally. The one option was using SF NuGet. Not sure if we have anything available latest on this.
Yeah, I mean, SF NuGet's a tool. It's not like a productized thing, but it would help solve this particular situation. That's where you would use it to pull the other person's service onto your machine, and then you could do testing. Another thing that's pretty common is that there's just some shared test environment, and it could be a tiny little one node cluster that's running somewhere, and both people deploy to that and then run some other unit testing. Most commonly, I think it's actually just unit testing where you test against a mock that you have locally of the other person's service, and then you save testing in some real environment for later in the pipeline. But like if you have a mock of the other person's service, whether it's their HTTP web APIs or I guess maybe their remoting APIs or something like that, then you can usually get a lot of mileage out of unit testing locally and making sure that things work as expected, and then promoting it to an actual test environment where maybe both services are running. That's kind of what you're doing when you do NuGet, is you're just pulling the other service onto your local box. So normally we see that more of a convergence where it's out somewhere else. And then local testing is via mocks. That's really the most common pattern. And that's more or less what you'd see in a more staged environment anyway, where I develop locally, I'm doing my unit testing, I'm doing my local one-box testing, I'm testing chaos, I'm doing all that locally. Then I promote into some test environment with a bunch of other applications and services, and they're all kind of executing against each other for real. And then once it graduates from that test environment, it might get promoted to an actual production environment. So that like local mocks, remote test client, remote test environment that's maybe smaller than prod, and then real prod environment is a pretty common pipeline that we see. Yeah, there's not really any great magic there. It's kind of the same thing for how would you test two separate modules in a thing where they're both being developed entirely in different things. That's pretty common. I guess a third thing that I've seen people do is I build my service and Boss builds his service, and when we check in, a build gets kicked off that's both of them, and they both then get deployed into that test environment.
Along with some automated tests.
Right, that's running continuously.
Yeah.
That shared test environment.
Yeah, this shared test environment is a little more automated.
Yeah. That way your local tests are just going against mocks.
Yep.
So you don't need to run the entire system locally. I guess it depends on how big the system is, though. If you can run the whole thing on your local dev environment, then it's just a matter of pulling down all the code and building everything. So this is one of those places where containers are actually kind of nice, because if everyone's publishing like last known good builds out to a container registry, then all you need is the application config. You don't need the actual code pulled down and have it compiled.
Yeah, just hit it over local.
You just deploy the application config, or run the script that deploys the application, and have it pull down the containers for all the dependent services that other people are working on. But that assumes that you can run the entire thing on a local Unbox. If it's too big to do that, then you have to start mocking things out, and then, like Matt said, have a test environment where things get deployed to through a CI system, and then run automated tests in there to actually test things end to end.
All right, so the next question we have from Marcina is, are you going to drop 404X Service Fabric resource not found workaround you use today in SFRP for port sharing services in Proxy v2 to make the more common non-port sharing scenario more streamlined?
Probably not.
That's the deepest.
I don't know why you would need that in, well, okay, Proxy v2, you mean, I'm not sure what you mean by Proxy v2. To make the more common port sharing scenario more streamlined.
I don't know how you could.
Oh, I see what you're asking.
He's asking about that header.
I see what you're asking. You mean, are we going to remove that because it's not needed anymore? Yeah, that you probably won't actually see anymore. The 404 thing was a weird
That's an
WinHTTP thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't really exist in
That's an HTTP sysism.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're asking if we're going to drop it, like not have it anymore, yeah, that's
hopefully,
fine. That's
yeah.
not there. That doesn't need to be there anymore. It's unnecessary. And the way that we do networking now with isolated networks and overlays, everyone has their own IP address anyway. So port sharing is kind of a thing of the past.
I think we might have jumped over something that Clint asked, which was, is there a way to get a good local dev experience?
Yeah, using for Angular, not just for Razor.
It seems only support ASP.NET Project is one with Razor. Interested in Angular, but I don't see a good dev experience. A good dev experience with Angular?
Oof,
is that
brutal.
a thing? Is that a thing?
Rough.
Brutal.
There are templates. So there's a Visual Studio template. If you go and create a new Service Fabric project and you select ASP.NET Core, then you can select Angular as the template that the ASP.NET Core project generates.
They've been bouncing. That tool chain has been rough from VS, Clint. I've dealt with it as well. I particularly the part about getting automated like refresh, so that when I change something in Angular, it automatically rebuilds and deploys. Application refresh mode helps a lot, where even if VS isn't correctly like auto rebuilding, at least I can do a manual build and then just refresh the page.
He was saying, I just for clarification, I was referring specifically to when using Mesh.
Adding mesh tooling on top.
Using mesh.
It should be the same.
It should be the same ASP.NET template. That one doesn't give you an Angular template option when you create an ASP.NET project.
Let's check. I haven't checked.
I can check, but that experience should be easier.
Yeah.
Because you don't even need to use...
Template is there, but the deployment is broken.
Oh, I see. The deployment is broken.
Okay.
Yeah, that's possible.
I would say open up an issue on with mesh. Or do we don't have a specific repo for that one yet.
We do. Yeah, there's the Service Fabric Mesh preview repo where we look at these kinds of...
I would say open it up there.
Yeah, okay. That tooling's still in pretty early stages, so I'm not terribly surprised that Angular's broken there. Drop us a reminder, though. And
yeah, we need to get that sorted out.
I think you already answered this maybe, but it looks like that's related to, from Marcin, related to remoting, right? So it said, for example, if I hit some .service/path and there is some .service is registered as a supported host header in gateway A, then when sending HTTP requests to some .service/path, those requests must somehow get routed to the gateway, especially there can be multiple gateways visible from a single network.
Where are you looking? Oh.
It's from Marcin.
Need to make traffic go to the gateway somehow. Names must somehow resolve to the gateway IP address.
So I think this is where we're asking, how does a service know which gateway to send the request through to target the individual service behind it, right?
Yeah,
And back and so forth. And this is something where if there's a discovery mechanism, I can't like ask the gateway, what services do you have behind you? Then I would have to pre-know this. Like if I deployed it in some subnet with gateway whatever, I would have to, in my own environment variables or something, pass that at deployment time to my next one.
You'd have to know the gateway VIP. Because the gateway doesn't really have a, well, the best way to probably do that would just be to attach a domain name to the gateway. So that's probably what you'd want, is have domain names on the gateway going between applications.
Yeah.
So
I think today,
interesting because, okay, I can see that.
The short answer, I think, is that today multiple application resolution, like resolving across apps, is probably going to be way harder than it will be eventually, both because like gateway features are not there, and also because the underlying connectivity is not as well established.
Like none of this stuff exists yet. But
yeah. So I think that's probably the main problem. Like once you get the ability to do multiple deployments kind of into the same environment, that'll help a lot.
Even if you're not in the same environment. I mean, again, you treat the gateway, you connect to the gateway the same way a client would. So the gateway has a VIP, and usually the VIP has a domain name associated with it. And so you talk to the domain name rather than the actual IP. So even if it's from one application to another, you'd still use the domain name of the gateway. Whether that's the same domain name that your application has is a good question.
Marcin has another follow-up. Marcin, I'm just gonna unmute you. I just did to make this a little bit easier.
I'm not skipping over any questions here.
No, right?
Okay.
No.
I think. Can you hear me?
Back and forth. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. So my question is because. In mesh environment, when you are exposing gateway to the internet, it's pretty much easy. But if you are trying to use gateways for network microsegmentation, if you run, for example, each service in a separate network and then put gateways between those networks, and you have all these configuration files where you say that this gateway hosts a service named my service something, whatever. There is a huge configuration you can put into gateway configuration, and then it would be really nice if DNS service available for the service network, which is the client of this gateway, could see all the names registered in the gateway as names that will resolve to this gateway IP address. So because it will be some kind of local network IP address of this isolated network. Yes.
You need a local DNS. Yeah. So every time you call out to a domain name of one of the other applications, it would end up at the right gateway.
Yes, exactly. And this is basically my question. Are you going to provide a DNS service for this purpose? Because previously it was like you wanted to serve the service names from the DNS, and now it's like there are in the network are the service names, but you have also the gateways, and those gateways have all the names registered inside them. Yes.
Yeah, and one gateway can front multiple, well, not today, but will be able to front multiple applications. So you could have multiple applications in the same private network, in the same overlay, and then you'd have a single gateway in front of it. So if I want to talk to one of those applications, I think what you'd end up having to do is you probably have some local DNS service, and I don't mean it's something you would deploy, but something we would put in the environment, which is some local DNS service. So if you make a request out to whatever domain name, if it happens to be one that's known by a gateway, it would end up at that gateway. So it actually resolved to the gateway IP address. So then the request would arrive at the gateway IP address. The host header would tell you what service to go to based on the domain name, and then it could route it accordingly. So it'd be like a little DNS ecosystem inside the environment.
Yeah, I think another thing to think about is that whether or not, that'll have to work. And then the other question is, today a lot of this is, I think, harder because everything's kind of living in its own entirely isolated network space.
Yeah.
So is there in the future, the idea is that maybe there's a VNet that's living kind of outside of mesh, that all of these apps are sitting in together, and then in that case the DNS space is kind of shared within that single network. Today they're separate networks, which makes it particularly harder.
Yeah.
But in the future you'd be able to have one kind of Azure VNet, and then these different apps would all be in that one VNet, and then everything would work pretty much naturally. That's something that we're working on, but it's not there yet, which is another reason why this is a little harder than it has to be.
Yeah, but I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
That's the thing we need to go think through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jacob asks, will the new network secret, etc. cluster resources be usable by kind of existing manifest-based applications? I think the goal of that is yes, but it's going to be, you might have to change the existing manifest applications to be represented, at least via the resource model. Mixing and matching those two might be possible, but we're still kind of trying to figure out the details of how that would even work. Because most things in the resource model are represented as resources and then references between all these resources. So there might be a secret service or a network management service that you could program, or that you could set up resources with the resource model, but then figuring out how you reference or attach or utilize those within the existing manifest is kind of still work in progress. We don't quite have a great answer for that yet. I think we want everything to be kind of useful across the spectrum, but again, it's figuring out how to represent it, because in the resource model, this network, this app is in this network, and you can clearly see that because the app is a resource and the network is a resource, and the app references the network resource, right? And so it's easy to see that relationship. When you don't have that relationship via the resource model, how do you represent that this resource network over here is associated with this app, or the other way around? That's still kind of, we don't know how that's going to work yet. So there might, at a minimum, you'd have to take the existing code, represent it as an application resource, and then deploy that, and then that should work.
That's the cleanest way.
Yeah, that's probably the cleanest way.
Yeah.
Looks like you followed up with, what is the level of control you'll have over the Envoy itself?
So Envoy is an implementation detail.
Yeah.
So that's something that Service Fabric configures on your behalf, and then we provide configuration that makes sense for Service Fabric applications. Generally speaking, you don't really want to try to configure Envoy yourself.
Having had some fun with that recently, you'd recommend against?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's complicated.
The other follow-up question to him is there any plans to open source the POA application?
We've talked about it, but I don't know why we haven't yet. It's not like it's incredibly, it's not super secret.
No.
I'm not sure why it hasn't been.
Yeah, I think it was just an oversight.
I actually thought it was.
No.
There's a ton of stuff to open source, so we probably just haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, but I think that's a good ask. That's something we can look into.
Yeah. Jacob, is there a specific pattern you have in mind? Do you mind if I unmute you and give you 30 seconds? I did unmute you, by the way, in case you just want to talk about it. It might be faster than typing. No mic. All right.
Executor service.
So yeah, I'm guessing obviously the platform's open source. The API that's using Repair Manager is there for you to look at and figure out how it works. That's a good ask, though. I asked the same question when I got here.
Yeah.
And the on-prem customer who's using the open source platform, POA is there to help you orchestrate your patches, and today that is not something you can look at how we implemented that service. But
is that in a separate repo right now?
POA?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. That's why I thought it was already.
I think we just need to talk with Raunak and Rishikesh.
To orchestrate chef runs or something. Yeah, I mean.
Oh, I see.
I get what you're asking here.
Well, why do you need to configure Envoy uniquely for that?
No, this was back to the idea
of
open source.
POA. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, POA uses the same kind of management APIs, frankly, as everything else does. So there's APIs like, disable this node, I'm going to reboot it. Disable this node, I'm going to destroy the drive. Stop this node, start this node. All of those APIs are there, and the patch orchestration application is just calling those. They're not the most complicated part of Service Fabric, certainly, so maybe you might be able to just look at that management suite and figure out what it's doing in order, or watch POA at work and see the order that it's doing things in. But I think it's completely fair. We should open source it. And also we've talked about taking the patch orchestration application and extending it specifically for the purpose of deploying other things. Like if it can deploy Windows patches, it can deploy whatever. And so you might be able to use it to roll out other OS patches or roll out patches to other pieces of framework stuff that are sitting on the machine that aren't OS managed components, things like that. That's all, TBD. We don't know if we're gonna do that stuff, but I think we should definitely open source it so that anybody else could see how those things work. The APIs mentioned like Xator infrastructure. I don't know that those terminology are correct. Most of them are just like disable service fabric mode, intent, restart. That's most of what it's doing under the hood. There's also a set of PowerShell verbs around repair that are also used, but there's really nothing special inside of the POA. It's mainly just an agent that's using standard management things to move stuff around. Where do you choose to serve for the local SKU cluster? Oh yeah, Andrew's figuring out how to do.
Just put the thumbprint in there.
Yeah, it's. I think that one might even let you do CN, but thumbprint is probably pretty good. Okay, we're out of time.
Yep.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for asking your questions. As usual, the recording will be posted up on YouTube. What number is this? We don't have the service
30.
anymore.
30.
This is number 30.
Okay. 30.
That's a big one.
Yeah. The big
This is when you start getting old, though.
Yeah, but your car insurance rates drop, so
So there are some benefits.
there are some benefits. Thank
Thanks,
you all for
everyone.
coming. Happy holidays. We'll see you soon. Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys.
Bye.